The train had been delayed by 40 minutes, which meant the usual chaos at the platform, passengers crowding, announcements echoing, people checking their phones more out of habit than need. He'd boarded without much thought, found his seat by the window, placed his bag overhead, and settled into the shallow numbness that long journeys often offered. It was late afternoon, the kind of gray where the sky can't decide between rain and surrender, and the air inside the train had that mixture of cheap coffee and damp wool that always reminded him of school trips and missed connections. He was looking out the window when he sensed someone pause beside him. He turned, and there she was. Hair darker than he remembered. Eyes the same. The exact same. For a moment, everything in his body forgot how to exist properly. She looked at him, briefly. Then at the seat number. Then away. No flicker of recognition, no smile, not even the narrowing of the eyes that often came with distant familiarity. She simply sat down across from him, pulled off her gloves, adjusted her coat, and stared ahead like he was a stranger. He said nothing. And maybe that's where it began again, not in words, not in any visible signal, but in the heavy quiet that settled between them like a curtain. Because she had once worn his ring. Because he had once asked her to stay. Because they had once stood in a kitchen, both angry and tired and too proud to step forward, and said things that were too final for how temporary they now seemed. He didn't know what surprised him more, that she was here, or that she acted as if they'd never met. There was no question it was her. The lines of her face had deepened, yes, and she sat more guarded now, the way people sit after learning that not everyone who touches your heart is meant to keep it. But it was her. Without doubt. Without hesitation. And so he waited. The train pulled out of the station slowly, as if reluctant to leave behind the weight of things unsaid. Outside, the city blurred into fields. Inside, time bent slightly. He watched her from the corner of his eye, the way she adjusted the sleeve of her sweater, the way she turned her face slightly away from the cold air leaking through the window, the way she held herself like a person who had mastered the art of not trembling. At one point, a man passed through the aisle selling drinks. She asked for tea. Her voice was softer now, or maybe it was just quieter than the version that still echoed in his memory. He listened to it like a song he'd once loved but couldn't hum anymore. Still, she said nothing to him. And he didn't say her name. Because some names, when spoken aloud, undo too much. But what he did do, quietly, deliberately, was take the small book from his coat pocket, the one she had given him all those years ago, and place it on the table between them. Not open. Just there. And when she looked down and saw it, her fingers paused. Just for a second. But long enough for him to know, she remembered. She didn't touch the book. She didn't reach for it or ask why it was there, didn't acknowledge it with a word or even a proper glance. But her fingers tensed slightly on the paper cup, and that was enough. He didn't expect more. Didn't want more, perhaps. After all this time, gestures carried more truth than conversations ever could. The train moved steadily, indifferent to the two people who once mapped out a life on napkins and notebooks, who had chosen curtains for a future apartment that never held their shadows. The countryside outside blurred in muted greens and browns, and for a moment it felt like neither of them were really moving, as if they were suspended, somewhere between then and now, between what almost was and what simply became. He thought of speaking. Thought of saying her name. But it tasted too sharp on the inside of his mouth, like something left too long without air. So he watched her instead, not intrusively, just openly. He allowed himself to see what had changed, the sharper line of her jaw, the way she now blinked more slowly, the kind of stillness that only people who've had to hold themselves together too long can truly possess. Years ago, she used to touch his arm lightly when laughing, used to leave notes on his mirror, used to say, "I'm not going anywhere," like it was a prayer, not a promise. He remembered the smell of her hair in the morning. The way she would pause before answering a difficult question. How she made breakfast in silence and always put the coffee down on his side of the bed before waking him up. They were engaged for 14 months. Long enough for it to feel inevitable, not long enough for it to survive what came next, the stress, the silences, the slow erosion of joy beneath practicalities and pride. No one cheated. No one lied. They just stopped knowing how to be kind at the right moment. And when it ended without a scream, just a door closing a little too gently. Now, after all that time, she sat 4 feet away. And when the train dipped briefly into a tunnel and the light shifted, he saw her reflection in the window, and in her reflection, her eyes were closed. When the train emerged into light again, she opened them. And for the first time in over 7 years, she spoke to him. You kept it. He didn't answer right away. Just nodded, once. It was the only thing I didn't box up, he said finally, voice low, like someone afraid of waking a memory that had been asleep too long.